Mr. Speaker, I rise in reluctant opposition to the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, which we'll be voting on today. The bill does include provisions that are vital to our national defense, but it also includes provisions that present a false choice between our safety and our values. Section 1021 would authorize the indefinite military detention of all terrorism suspects, allowing the United States to detain an individual, some of whom may be innocent, without charge or trial during this endless war on terrorism, undermines our most defining principles as a nation of individual freedom and justice for all.
All right, folks, there is a lot going on right now. Decisions being made that are unprecedented and will have an overreaching impact on what it means to live in the United States of America. A few things. The case of Bradley Manning, his treatment, and the precedent his case will set for future whistleblowers and for transparency, but, we just talked about that. This is just scratching the surface. Also, Congress, your elected officials, both the Senate and the House of Representatives, have just overwhelmingly passed the National Defense Authorization Act. Now, this is not just funding for the Pentagon that's included in this bill. This legislation also has two provisions that give more power to the military and to the government, and so massively alter the Constitution that it's almost laughable, or at least it was laughable when President Obama said he would veto the bill. Now it turns out he won't. So here's what's squeezed into this military fund. Not just money, but lots and lots of power. First, a provision that expands the use of military force in Afghanistan to include indefinite detention of anyone suspected of being a member of al-Qaeda or, quote, associated forces. So anyone. But here's the big one, folks. It gives the military the power to indefinitely detain American citizens, even those captured here in the United States, suspected, just suspected, not convicted, of some sort of involvement or affiliation with terrorism. So no trial, prison based solely on suspicion. The Fourth Amendment, out the window. As you may be able to tell, I think this is kind of a big deal, but I'm not the only one. Jason Leopold is the deputy managing editor of truthout.org. He is in our Los Angeles studio. Jason, I know you wrote an article titled Obama's Twisted Version of American Exceptionalism, detailing some of the ironies here. You're pretty outraged, but a lot of Americans not so shocked about this, don't really realize what's going on. What do you think are some of the biggest things that are being ignored right now?
Well, the biggest thing that's being ignored is exactly how this bill would apply to U.S. citizens. Now, we've heard from various members of Congress, Carl Levin, who is the chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, who worked on this bill with Senator John McCain. We've received assurances from various lawmakers that U.S. citizens would not be affected by this, that it would not apply to this. However, immediately after the bill was passed, Senator Dianne Feinstein introduced legislation referred to as the Due Process Act of 2011. And what that would do is ensure that this particular bill, more or less, would not apply to U.S. citizens. Basically, that indefinite detention of U.S. citizens would not happen unless there was an express act of Congress, and that's what her legislation says. It's very short, and it's proposed at this point, but it seems to be a protection that was introduced because there's so much murkiness and with the National Defense Authorization Act. So there are many people right now that are defending the bill, and what they're truly defending is President Obama. That's what this comes down to. They're defending him. They're defending the fact that he had caved in on the promise to veto it simply because Congress made minor changes to the legislation. And so the outrage is somewhat being limited to just people who feel that the bill would actually just affect U.S. citizens. But again, there's a bigger picture here, and that's the indefinite detention of people in general without giving them the opportunity to hear, what the charge is.
Yeah, and a couple things that you said here, Jason. I mean, first of all, President Obama originally did say that he would veto this. It was sort of because it didn't give the White House and his administration enough power. I think there's a little bit of politics involved here, too, because if you look, this bill passed in the Senate, I think it was 93-7, and in the House, 200 and something to 100 something. I don't know, I haven't done the math totally, but it seems to me that even if the president said he would veto this, that this could get overturned by a 2/3 majority. Not sure about that yet. This could be politics as well. So let's talk about Obama's rule. I know a number of people had pointed this out. I know you did as well. Something that is clear as day. This was articulated by President Obama in a proclamation commemorating the 63rd anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The president said, quote, "All people should live free from the threat of extrajudicial killing, torture, oppression, and discrimination, regardless of gender, race, religion, nationality, sexual orientation, physical or mental disability." All right, so Jason, give me some examples, some ways in which the president and his administration have blatantly gone against this.
Well, this was the basis of the report I put together yesterday prior to the passage by the Senate of the bill and of the National Defense Authorization Act. And what I really want to point out here and articulate to people is that indefinite detention is a human rights issue. It has not been spoken about in those terms. It's not just a civil liberties issue, and this is not just about whether this bill applies to U.S. citizens. Okay, this is a human rights issue. As early as Wednesday, as I pointed out in this report, the State Department issued a press release noting that they had implemented sanctions against 2 Iranian officials for acts that took place during the disputed presidential election in 2009, acts that included the indefinite detention of Iranian citizens and the torture of those citizens. If you take the time to go and look on the State Department's website, every single allegation that is included in that press release is exactly what we have done, the United States has done, to war on terror detainees during the Bush administration, and what it continues to do under the Obama administration, particularly indefinite detention. So indefinite detention is defined as a human rights abuse when other countries do it. That's the exceptionalism that is an example that took place as early as Wednesday. Through the past 3 years, I believe I've included quite a number of examples that shows that the Obama administration says one thing and does another, particularly as it relates to this, this war on terror, this global war on terror.
There are people, Jason, who are saying that this act, the National Defense Authorization Act, these 2 provisions in it particularly, this is taking this country and anyone detained, suspected, this could be a one-way ticket to Guantanamo Bay for them. I mean, is that overreacting a little bit?
I think that's a bit of an overreaction. I don't see that actually happening. I also want to point out an irony here that this was passed on the 220th anniversary of the Bill of Rights. Another bizarre sort of twist. But I don't believe that people would end up in Guantanamo. I think that the bill actually ensures that Guantanamo won't close down. That's some of the other disturbing, provisions in this bill, that it does not allow for the trial of any suspected terrorists that remain incarcerated in that prison facility in the United States. It basically bans funding for any civilian trial here in the U.S. But again, it's unclear exactly how this bill and how these measures would be applied if someone was picked up. I imagine that it'll eventually end up, in front of the Supreme Court. However, I also want to point out that White House spokesperson Jay Carney said yesterday during a press briefing that it would not end up in front of the courts. If in fact anything came up, it's at the the
Jason,
president's discretion to interpret it, and he would simply go back to the authors of these specific provisions.
All right, we are out of time. We are out of time.
Some changes.
Some really, really important points that you make there. I think you used a perfect word to describe this when you say there's a lot in here that's so murky. It might be too late before we realize what actually the consequences are. Jason Leopold, Deputy Managing Editor of truthout.org.